Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that has lived in the quiet corners of my memory. The kind of story you can't tell just anyone because once it's spoken aloud, it becomes real. And once something becomes real, you can't pretend it never happened. This isn't a story of neat beginnings or tidy endings. It's a story about how a single moment can stretch into something you can't quite name. How a look, a tone of voice, a seemingly harmless comment can ripple through your life until you realize you're standing somewhere you never planned. It started on one of those quiet Sunday mornings that feel almost staged, like a scene from a movie. The air was warm with the scent of fresh coffee, and the only sounds were the occasional clink of dishes in the kitchen. Outside, the light was soft, spilling through the curtains in gentle gold strips across the floor. I was halfway through, making breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast. The usual, when I heard the familiar rhythm of footsteps down the hallway. My stepson, Ryan, appeared in the doorway. He was stretching and yawning, his hair still tousled from sleep, the kind of sleepy unguardedness that made people look younger than they are. We exchanged the usual good morning, and it should have ended there. Just another day. But I noticed something, a pause in his eyes. They lingered on me for a heartbeat too long, long enough to register, long enough to feel slightly out of place. Ryan had always been charming, friendly, easy to talk to, and sometimes more confident than was entirely comfortable. I'd been married to his father for 5 years, and in that time, Ryan had been, for the most part, polite and respectful. But every now and then, there had been moments, little comments about how I didn't look old enough to be a stepmom, compliments on my outfits that carried a tone I couldn't quite pin down. I'd always brushed them off, chalking it up to his personality. He was social, quick with a joke, and comfortable with people. That was just Ryan, or at least that's what I told myself. That morning, though, his voice had a different edge to it. As I plated the eggs, he leaned casually against the counter and said, "You really don't look like someone who's been married for 5 years." He said it without the usual playful lilt. His tone was lower, slower, deliberate. Something in my stomach tightened. Still, I smiled, laughed lightly, and shifted the conversation to something harmless, asking if he wanted coffee or juice. He didn't press the comment, but the way he looked at me didn't fade quickly. It stayed there, like a faint echo. I couldn't shake. After breakfast, I went about my usual Sunday routine: laundry, light cleaning, answering a few work emails, trying to file the moment away in my mind as nothing. But every so often, it slipped back in uninvited. And it wasn't just what he said. It was the way he'd looked at me, as if searching for something in my reaction. Throughout the day, I noticed him popping up in little ways. He asked about my plans for the week, offered to help fold laundry, lingered in the kitchen when I was chopping vegetables for dinner. None of it was overtly strange, but there was an undercurrent to his presence. A quiet awareness. That evening, my husband was still at work, so it was just Ryan and me in the living room. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a movie playing, the kind of casual setting where you're half watching and half daydreaming. At some point, he shifted closer, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. He made a comment about how some women don't bother taking care of themselves after marriage. "But you're different," he added. It was framed as a compliment, but there was a weight to it that made my pulse quicken. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe I was just tired, maybe a little too aware of small things. But when he stood to head toward his room, he paused. In the doorway, he looked back at me and said, "You really are something else." There was no smile, no joking, tone, just a steady look that lingered for a moment before he turned away. I sat there frozen for a beat longer than I should have. My heart was thudding faster than it had any reason to. And I didn't know if it was discomfort, confusion, or something I didn't want to name. I tried to let the moment dissolve into the background of the week, but it clung to me, like a faint stain on fabric. You could try to scrub it away, but it left a trace. The next morning, he was unexpectedly helpfully loading the dishwasher without being asked. I thanked him, and he just smiled, holding my gaze a second too long before looking. In the days that followed, I saw a subtle shift. I was in the kitchen, he'd wander in for no real reason. If I was folding clothes in the living room, he'd sit nearby, talking about his friends or work, topics that seemed casual on the surface but felt somehow like placeholders for something else. When he handed me something, his hand would brush mine briefly. When we crossed paths in the hallway, there was an awareness in the way he looked at me. At first, I convinced myself I was just being oversensitive. But then the comments started. Bolder ones. One afternoon we were discussing dinner plans, and he smirked before saying, "If Dad paid half as much attention to you as I do, you'd be a lot happier." I froze for half a second, not sure whether to laugh or call him out. He didn't seem embarrassed. If anything, he looked faintly amused, as if my silence was the response he'd expected. And here's the truth. I didn't want to admit to myself his attention stood out. My husband had been more distant lately. Long nights at the office, conversations that felt clipped, weekends eaten up by catching up on work. Ryan's focus was a contrast I couldn't help but notice. And while I didn't like the way it made me feel, I couldn't deny that I felt seen. That realization unsettled me. I told myself I needed to create some distance, and yet I didn't. Push him away as firmly as I could have. One evening, I was tidying up when my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "We need to talk alone." I stared at it, feeling a knot form in my chest. I didn't reply right away. Part of me was relieved at the idea of ignoring it. Another part. WASN single quotes T. Eventually, I typed back. About what? The reply came almost instantly. Sat there staring at those two words. The line between harmless and inappropriate had been blurring for days. And now it felt like we were teetering on the edge of something that could tip either way. When we did talk, it was late afternoon. The house felt still, as if it knew something was about to happen. My husband was still out. Ryan didn't bother with small talk. He told me in a calm voice that he'd been holding this in for months, that he had real feelings for me. Not just a passing thought, but something deeper. He said I was the only one who really listened to him. It's the only one who saw him for who he was. I could feel my heart beating hard in my chest. My first instinct was to shut it down immediately, to draw a firm line. But the words didn't come as quickly as they should have. There was a flicker of something validation, maybe curiosity, that caught me off guard. He went on, telling me his father didn't appreciate me, that I deserved more, that he could give me the kind of attention I wasn't getting. Every sentence felt heavier, stretching time in an uncomfortable way. I wanted to tell him it was wrong, that it couldn't happen. But I hesitated, and in that pause he stepped closer. Slowly, deliberately, like he was waiting for me to stop. The air felt dense. Every nerve in my body was on alert. I knew exactly how wrong it was, and yet temptation has a way of making wrong feel almost logical in the moment. My thoughts were a blur. Thought of my husband, of the years we'd built together. I thought of the look in Ryan's eyes. For the briefest second, I wondered what would happen if I just didn't move away. That thought alone was enough to jolt me. And then fate intervened. I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My husband's car. The spell broke instantly. Ryan stepped back, his expression unreadable, and I moved away. Moments later, the front door opened. I greeted my husband with a calm smile, my voice steady even as my pulse raced. Ryan slipped into casual conversation as if nothing had happened. I followed suit. But inside, my thoughts were a mess. That night, I replayed the moment over and over. The sound of the car in the driveway, the narrowing of space between us. The way I had let it get that far. The guilt pressed down like a weight. I couldn't shift by morning. I knew I had to end whatever unspoken thing had been building. I asked Ryan to talk privately. He looked almost like he'd been expecting it. Maybe he thought we'd pick up where we left off. But instead, I told him clearly this couldn't happen. It could never happen. Boundaries had already been blurred, and I wasn't going to let them dissolve completely. He seemed frustrated at first, like he wanted to argue, but eventually, he nodded and muttered an apology. I didn't need more from him. I just needed the conversation to be over. Later that day, I turned my focus to my husband. I didn't tell him the details some things once said can't be unsaid, but I did. Tell him I'd been feeling distance between us, that we needed to make time for each other. To my surprise, he listened, really listened. We made plans for a night out, no work, no distractions. In the days that followed, Ryan kept more of a distance. Every so often, I caught a look from him. That reminded me the tension hadn't vanished entirely, only been pushed down. But I was determined to keep it there. I had stepped dangerously close to a line I should never have approached, and the lesson was seared into me. Temptation can be intoxicating, convincing you in the moment that it makes sense. But in the end, it's the choices you make in its shadow that define you.